Great honor to welcome to the show. And I had no idea she was also on the East Coast. You think of her and her band being so synonymous with Washington State and Seattle. But joining us right now, Ann Wilson of Heart. Ann, great to see you. How are you?
Excellent. How are you doing, Eddie?
I'm good. I'm good. So, I first of all, thank you for allowing us to premiere this song today. I was saying to my audience earlier, it's very rare anymore that radio guys get to premiere new songs. Having been in this for so long myself, it used to be kind of the norm. Now everything just pops up on the internet. So it's kind of cool to have the opportunity to play something for people for the first time and get a chance to hear a new song, not only just a new song, but a song that's really killer. Because of course I've listened to it already, called The Hammer. Tell us a little bit about this track. I know you've been gradually putting out some solo music recently, right?
Yeah. Last fall I went back to Seattle and I got just a bunch of musos together. And I had a bunch of songs that I'd been writing during lockdown, and we recorded them, and Hammer was one of them. Uh, it just, it was great working. I mean, nothing against professional musicians, but these guys that I got with are just local guys, who some of them played sessions, some of them just play gigs, in bars and stuff. And so it was a real raw band, and it was really refreshing. It was really refreshing and powerful. No rules, no expectations.
How did you know about these musicians? And had you seen them around on the circuit? Had you befriended some of them? How did you even know that there would be a chemistry to make it work?
Well, I knew some of them already and had played with a couple of them already. Daniel Walker and Andy Stoller have been working with me for a while. They're both from Seattle. And Sean Lane, the drummer percussionist, and Tyler Boley. I just met Sean Lane this time by word of mouth. I think Andy or one of the two guys knew him and just said, "Hey, you should try this guy." And I was really glad I did. Young, really up and coming guy, can do it all, real smart, real passionate. And Tyler Boley is an old friend from like the 70s who is just like this crazy maniac photographer, guitar guy who, probably is a little too complicated for the world, but when he gets on his axe, he just goes right there, and it was just amazing to play with orchids.
How were you able to do it? Did you record this stuff during the pandemic? Was it sending files around, or were you actually able to all get in a room, or was it done prior to COVID?
Well, we all got in a room, but let me tell you, it was during COVID, and I'd already tried sending the files around, and what I was getting back were just like this mountain of stuff. Everybody, adding their part and sending it back to me, and then having to sort of plow through it and make sense out of it. And I thought, this is not working for me. So I bit the bullet, and my husband and I leased a tour bus, and we took off with a strict COVID protocol drawer and everything, and drove out to the West Coast from Florida, stopping in all the state parks along the way and sleeping in campgrounds and all that. And then we got to Seattle and spent 5 days, or more like 7 days, in the studio, a little hole in the wall studio there called Uber Beats. And just totally on the down low, and just recorded these songs. And then on the way back, we stopped at Joshua Tree and, Bridal Veil Falls and just all the big Yellowstone, and just really saw the country. It was such an amazing, refreshing trip, during having been in quarantine for months and months. So that's the story about how we got that stuff recorded.
Yeah, it's not all that uncommon what you're saying. I was just interestingly, Miles Kennedy, who's a good friend who lives in Spokane, I was talking to him, and he just made a solo record, and his producer in the studio he normally works at is in Orlando. And I said to him, well, what did you do? Did you get on a plane or what'd you do? And he said, no, rented an SUV with
No.
my bass player manager, and we drove from Spokane to Orlando. And I said, I don't think you could possibly go to two further points and stay in the US. And, you know, he's a guy, three different bands or whatever. He's always out there. And he said, but you know, it was actually really refreshing because we were traveling at our own pace. We got to stop and see some things. And a touring rock band, is, I'm sure you can attest, you're go, 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 one city to the next. You rarely get to see what the places you're in. So I imagine
Right.
if we're looking at some silver linings in all of this crazy year, that for you, that had to be sort of a cool thing to be able to do, even after spending decades on the road.
Oh, it was totally cool. And like your friend said, it's a whole different thing than going into a city um, in the wee hours of the morning, waking up, doing a show, and then moving on, driving through the night. It's totally different than that. It was just really a great experience, and made me remember the beauty of this country and just how big it is. I guess when you are used to riding around on tour buses and everything for decades, the whole country seems like easy to get to. You know, you can get to Florida. You can imagine going from LA to Maine, no problem. You just have your book and you sleep and then you're there, you know. So it wasn't that big of a deal to go coast to coast.
And it's interesting you talk about the chemistry that it wasn't working for you doing the file sharing thing and everybody recording individually. But we, you know, I've talked to many artists and sometimes they'll tell me, you know what, I never met the guy that's on this record. You know, I don't even, it was just, we
Yeah.
never in the same room. We never even met. It's crazy to me, but it happens very common because of technology. But then there are many artists that I talk to and like, you know what? I got to be looking at somebody in the eye. I got to be on the floor. I got to be in a studio. They've got to have that. And I feel, just as a fan, of course, I'm not a musician, but I feel there's something to be said for that. I really like the idea of hearing that people got in the same room and created what I'm listening to. It sounds like you're much more of that cloth.
That's really my whole philosophy is I tried it the other way, but I can't really make a song light up, you know, unless there's that human connection with, especially with the drums and the bass, you know, in the studio, and everybody's just kind of there collaborating with each other's souls. That's when I find the heat, you know. It's just really hard to do it digitally, you know. It's just really hard to get that passion.
Of all the, when you think back on the career that you've had, and over the decades you've worked with a variety of different producers and I'm sure in incredible studios all over the country, maybe all over the world, is there a moment for you, or are there moments that stand out for you, whether it's you know, in the creative process, working in a legendary studio or a legendary setting, or with a producer perhaps that really had an impact on you and really made a mark?
Yeah, I mean, different producers, they're many and they're different and varied. Some of them think that the way to get the best performance out of a singer is to make him or her furious or angry or something. And and then there are others who treat you kind of more like a crystal object, like, oh, don't upset her, you know. We'll never get a good take if she's upset. And there, and then there are some that just like throw it open and say, okay, sing. Let's see what we get. Um, I don't know. I just think that there's all different kinds, and the studios themselves really, the atmospheres in different studios don't really matter to me, because you turn down the lights and you get into the song, and it doesn't matter if you're on Earth or not, you know.
As somebody that's such an accomplished vocalist like yourself, what do you like? What do you prefer the approach of a producer to be? Do you like them to really work you and pull a lot from you, or do you prefer to kind of be left alone a little bit more?
I prefer to be left alone and then sing and then go in and listen and go, oh yeah, I see. Now I see. I don't like to be told. I like to hear it myself, you know. I guess everybody's that way, huh?
Probably right. These songs that you're releasing that we're talking about right now, is the end game here a full record, or are you just going to continue to put singles out? What do you what do you hope to do with all of this stuff? Will it be a fully realized album at some point?
Well, I'm enjoying just dropping the singles one by one so that people can actually concentrate on a song at a time. Um, Maybe after I'm done, putting out 10 or 12 singles, I'll just put them on a compilation, something like that.
Yeah, I hope you do, because I understand the need to put out singles, and I understand people's attention spans are way less than they used to be when they would take in a full album, no problem. But at the end of all of that, excuse me, I feel like sometimes when people drop a lot of singles after a long period of time, they almost get lost in the shuffle. I don't know, maybe I'm just old school, but at the end of the day, I do like them to all be in one concise package somewhere, because I feel like sometimes you forget
In
about
one
stuff when
place,
it's not
yeah.
really there. Yeah. Yeah. Well, how many more do you have? Are there a bunch in the can, so to speak, or are you doing them as they come to you?
I got 4 more right now I'm going down, leaving day after tomorrow to go over to Muscle Shoals and spend a week in there and do these next 4.
That's awesome. And can I ask you, and it's an obvious thing because I'm sure you're asked about it so much, but it's just so incredible, is your voice. And I'm astonished by singers who set this bar so high when they were much younger. And there's very few that as they get older, they can still do that. And you're certainly one of them. It's remarkable to me. Has it been, as you've gotten older, a challenge for you to sing certain things, or because to the listener it doesn't sound like it, but can you talk a little bit about vocally how you've maintained, and do you do anything to maintain now that you're older, different than when you were younger?
Well, of course, when I was 25 years old, I didn't like we could do 6 shows a week, 3 hours or 4 hours a night, and I'd be hoarse in the morning, but by the night I'd be fine again. When you're 24, 25. But now I can do 2 shows in a row and do everything I want to do, and then I need a day off for it to all heal up. And I eat a bunch of arnica and vitamin C and drink water and stuff, and then I'm okay again. So it's 2 on, 1 off now, really.
Yeah, but really, that's not asking a lot. I mean, I was, before you came on, I referenced Steven Tyler, and I know, talking to those guys, I mean, he won't do more than 2 shows a week. He doesn't want to do. He wants way more time off than that. So 2 on, 1 off is actually pretty reasonable. That's kind of like what most people, I would think, want to do to maintain.
Yeah, yeah. 1 whole day is about as much time as it takes for the cells to regenerate.
And are you
Anyway.
somebody that does a big warm up? Are you a big warm up, warm down person? That's always amazed me too with great singers. Some will have these big routines and regimens they do pre and post singing, and then other great singers I know just, no, I just walk out and do it. So what's your process there?
Well, mine's probably in the middle somewhere. The hour before I walk on stage, I sing along with an entire CD of somebody I like Lucinda or Zeppelin or just some CD. I'll just sing the whole thing along with the CD, and so that's like maybe 40 minutes of straight singing gently, and then I go on and it opens right up. But I never just walk on cold. That and really, it's not so much about the skin of your throat; it's about opening your soul. It's hard to just come in off a tour bus and go on stage and be all open and effusive and everything. You have to just coax it open so that when you go out there, it all comes out.
Did you ever have times in your career where it was a challenge, where you went through problems, or you had to have procedures done, or you had lost it for a while, or had to cancel shows because of it? Have you had issues like that ever?
Well, I've never had any procedures. I've had to cancel in my career maybe 4 or 5 shows in 40 years because of that very thing, because I'm sick or something and my throat is just not going to do it. So then the trick, of course, is to just admit, well, I'm not going to be able to do it tonight. So all the people that have bought tickets and come in from other cities or got hotel reservations and they spent all this money to come see you, they lose out, because it's not there to give them.
Yeah.
That's a horrible feeling.
I was mentioning that your performance on Mopop with for the Alice in Chains guys, doing that incredible version of Rooster. Can you talk a little bit about putting that together? I thought it was just fantastic what you did.
Yeah, that song is so powerful and so dark, and got such great space and atmosphere. Um, I just always loved it. So when it came up that I was asked to contribute to that Mopop thing, I went straight there. I know how personal that song is for Jerry about his dad, in Vietnam. And of course, now the song is even more universal than that because it's so well known and people take it into their own lives. But yeah, it was a real honor and a thrill because there's so much room in that song for me to really blow, just like to be emotional, to get really theatrical, I dig that kind of stuff. And I'm glad that they liked it too. I heard from them later and they were like, okay. So
Well, yeah, I talked to them before I talked to them the afternoon before the whole stream premiered. And what was interesting is they didn't know or want to know really who was doing what. They had some ideas, but they had wanted to take it in. They told me just like as a fan, like it was surreal that it was their music being featured, but obviously they're such fans of the artists that were tributing them, like yourself, that they wanted to the whole reveal of it to happen with everyone else, which I thought was great.
right, yeah. And of course, I go way back with those guys, back into the so-called grunge days in Seattle. The actual uh, musicians back then hated the grunge term because they were just rock musicians, and this term was applied from the outside. But uh, we had some really good times, and there were a lot of really scary, terrifying times too, with people not making it, and
Right.
the community back then was rocked by a lot of really hard things. So there was a closeness about it because of that, forged some really amazing friendships. And of course, then later on, in later years, in the early 2000s, Mikey played bass for Heart for a couple of years. And
Right.
that was outstanding because he's like such a good player and such a great soul and a perfect comedic timing. So being on tour with someone like that is just really, it was great fun.
Being from that area and then having obviously Heart predating that whole scene by 20 years, but when that scene hit and Seattle became such a fertile ground for this movement that was happening at the time, what was your take on it as you know, just watching this happen in your home area and watching the feeding frenzy of the labels? And just like any scene, I'm sure there were some bands that were good and some that weren't so good that came out of it. But what was your take? How did it make you feel to see all that happening in that area of the country that was so important to you, some 20 years later from when you first broke out of there?
Well, let me tell you, it put me right off my feet because just professionally, we had to go to all these great lengths all over the country and all over the world to get known with Heart, years before. But then in the 90s, here we have the tide has turned and all eyes are on Seattle. So you have these lawyers and managers and people from LA and New York coming into SeaTac Airport and changing into their plaid shirts in the airport restroom so they can come and lobby with these young guys, who are basically punks and don't know how to take all the attention. It was a cross between being really happy for them and being really feeling protective of them because they were, in a sense, incredibly innocent of the pitfalls of the entertainment industry and all that means when you're in it, coming after them and enveloping them, in their purity. And I think it probably sounds weird to hear me talking about grunge players as being pure, but that was one of the most beautiful things about it is that it was a totally pure fuck you, and they didn't, the thing that they were rebelling against was coming to get them and swallowing them up. And a lot of them were uncomfortable and terrified. So I was pleased, and Nancy too, were pleased to give them places to come where they can hang out and be neutral, and just kind of, hand them a beer and say, okay, honey, it's all right. I, I'm going to light the fire in the fireplace. You can just sit on the carpet and chill. you know,
Let me ask you, let's get up to speed a little bit as far as Heart. You did a tour, the Love Alive tour, and I think a lot of people were very happy and relieved to see you and Nancy come back together and the band reconstitute. Where are things at now with the two of you? And now that we're hopefully seeing an end to COVID somewhere maybe towards the back end of this year, are there plans to continue to work with Nancy and continue to do Heart?
well, there are always plans. Yeah. I mean, we have a Canadian tour just like hanging there waiting for COVID to clear. Heart does. And, you know, that's just like everyone's in the same boat. It's just everyone wants to play, and Live Nation wants to put on shows, and everybody's waiting. Everyone wants to go to shows. It's just a matter of when we can all safely assemble, and then things will return.
Have the two of you discussed the idea of doing new music and a new Heart album at any point?
We haven't yet, and I know that she's coming with a solo album soon, and I have a bunch of new stuff. So whenever we get around to that point, I'm sure there'll be new music involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would love to hear that and see you guys, be able to go back out on the road, just like all these bands that we're missing for sure. Let me also ask you about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You guys were inducted into that, and I thought the way you handled that induction was fantastic as a band. There is so many fans that long want to see a band they love go into the Hall of Fame, and it really, most artists tell me it's so much
Right.
about the fans, and the fact that the way you guys
is.
did it, the band did it, meaning all the members that were honored to be able to include them, to be able to play a song with the original guys, whatever issues there, to bury that and suppress that for the betterment of the event and the night, I thought was fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about that when you look back on your induction and the performances and the way you did it, your thoughts now in retrospect?
Yes. You know, it was surreal playing with the original lineup again with Steve Fossen and Mike DeRocher and Roger Fisher, because we hadn't played together for what, 35 years. So it was kind of, an abstraction to us. And when the band actually got together to play and rehearse the day before, I guess it was, yeah, off-site the day before, we had to go through the songs to remember them together. It was remarkable to me how different the band felt from the way the band feels now with different people. It was much more up, down, left and right. There wasn't the same swing factor, and I just think that's time moving on. But yeah, it kind of reminded me of being 25 again and living up in Canada.
Were there any reservations about doing it? There are famous stories, of course, with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where there are people like, I'm just not going to go on the stage with that guy, and I'm not going to play with that woman, and I'm not going to do this or that. And then really at the end of the day, the fans just suffer. If you can just suck it up for a song or two like you
Yeah.
guys did, I thought it was wonderful. So out of the gate, was it always like, no, we're going to do this the way it should be done? I mean, I thought it was wonderful how you handled it.
Well, thank you. I think that there was no point in dragging a bunch of expired baggage, up onto that stage. It's just supposed to be a night of fun and triumph, So we didn't want to sully it with anything dirty. And there wasn't that much dirty stuff anyway. Like I said, all the whatever problems and issues we may have had with those people is long since forgotten. You just got to let that shit go. And we did.
And when you look back at the history of Heart and all the different musicians who have been in it over the years, including the current musicians that you have in the band, do you look at that as a positive? Do you think that having the various different lineups and the people that have been in the band over the decades has helped to keep the band invigorated and changed? Or would you prefer, as the singer in the band, would you prefer if it would have been more streamlined with the same people throughout your whole career?
I think that in order to keep the band relevant, and just a second, I have a puppy biting my toe.
I saw a dog running around back there. I wasn't sure if it was a dog or a
Sorry,
cat. There he is.
it's a dog and he was biting my toe. No, I think that to keep the band alive and relevant, you have to keep on moving, and the thing that wrecks most band chemistries is just outside stuff. But once it's wrecked, and if you force yourselves to go on together, even though you can't stand each other, that's the rankest lie, living a lie and expecting the fans just to swallow it. So I've always thought it was better to, as time goes along, work with people you can really dig and keep leveling up.
You and Nancy, of course, knocked down so many doors for women in this industry decades ago. And now from where I sit and going out to shows when they happen and festivals and what have you, I find it really encouraging because there's so many women now in rock bands, even if they're not the singer or the guitar player.
Yeah.
I've seen bands that just have a woman as a drummer. When you go to see shows, you see so many more women on the crews. It used to be, oh, maybe they're just in the wardrobe room. Now they're front of house or setting up stuff or tour managing. That's got to feel really good for
Driving
you.
trucks, yeah.
Yeah, that's got to feel, I would imagine, for you with what you endured. It's got to feel really good for you to see where things are at now in the rock world when it comes to women and their
Oh,
involvement in it.
yeah, totally. It's just like a slowly evolving thing, just like music. I mean, and it takes also women just being bold and saying, yeah, I can do this job. Here, let me show you, I can do it. And we can get along on a crew. Just because I'm female doesn't mean we have to have sexual politics involved. I mean, we're just doing a job and proving it. So yeah, I'm real happy about that. And I've met some really, really amazing women on crews and driving truck and tour managing and lawyers and accountants. And, it's much better if it's true equality. And it's like the rest of the world, men and women working together. Why not in rock?
Yeah. I'm going to hit you with one super geeky heart thing, and then I'll let you go and I'll play the song and let you get back to your dog.
Okay.
But I want to ask you about a certain period of heart that I've always been interested in. And I have a great fascination as a lifelong rock fan for these records that maybe weren't super well received when they came out, but are kind of pivotal records and bridges from one period into the next. And the records I'm referencing when it comes to heart are two albums I like a lot. One is Private Audition from 82, and the other is Passion Works from 83. On Private Audition, Cities Burning, one of my favorite Heart songs, unbelievable riff. And I love How Can I Refuse which was the single, of course, from Passion Works. I know that was a difficult time because it was you guys transitioning from one label into the whole change and the relaunch, if you will, of the band, and Ron Nevison coming back in and all the big success with What About Love and that whole self-titled record. But I'm curious about the two records prior to it. What do you think of when you look back on those records? Do you look at it as, well, that was a tough time, or that was an interesting and good time that just got overlooked commercially?
Private Audition, I think it was a real transitional time, especially Private Audition, because we had just come down off of all kinds of extracurricular things like a legal battle and inter-band relationships breaking up and all this kind of stuff. And we didn't really have the songs, and we went and met with Bob Ezrin, the producer up in Canada, and said, we'd love to work with you. We'd love to write with you for this record. We have 2 or 3 songs here. And he said, okay, let's do it. And then so we got to the actual recording and he flagged. So there we were in LA with the studio booked and houses booked and everything. And so we went on this try to pull an album together thing. And we got a few songs that were good, like Cities Burning, and Hey Darling, Darling, stuff like that. But it never was an album where all the ducks were in a row. And I think you can feel it on that record. We worked in LA, we worked in New York, and I think up in Seattle. He's just all over the place. And then, of course, Passion Works, we saw that we needed to really be ready before we went into the studio. And so we hired Keith Olsen, and he was a really good guy for us to work with because he really brought the elements back together. And we had hired by that time Mark Andes and Denny Carmassi. And so we had a band again, real tough band. Denny came out of Montrose, and Mark had been in Firefall before that. Yeah. And so we actually had a really good band. And so we got back on our feet and took a breath with Passion Works. And then, of course, went into the 80s.
Yeah, I know you've always had a bit of a conflicted relationship with the 80s stuff, as popular and as much as it relaunched the band. You and Nancy have both said it. You're not quite sure, you know, outside writers and what have you. When you look back on it now and how successful it was, you still feel that way? Like, what is your, how do you feel about that period of Heart's career that was that whole MTV dominated time?
Yeah, well, I think that probably, it might sound strange to say this, but I think probably the most quality stuff that came out of the 80s for Heart were the rock videos. I mean, those big outlandish, over the top, big hair videos at least had some substance to them. And nothing against people who like the music of the 80s, but I don't think there was much real raw substance in the music of that period. There were a few songs like Lisa Dalbello's Wait for an Answer, things like that, that were actually really edgy. But there's also a real preponderance of stuff that it's just fluff, you know, and it's all covered in this kind of 80s gloss, all these synthesizers and reverb and just every echo and every weird sound, so much so that you can almost not even access the band, certainly not access my voice. And Nancy was being told, put down that acoustic guitar. Acoustic guitars are not in, you know, just look cute and be a singer. And so that put her off balance. And of course I was off balance because I couldn't find myself, you know. So that was a difficult period. It did relaunch the band in a whole other way, in a pop way.
Yeah, and the last thing on this, and then I'll let you go. What I found interesting about that time, which I don't know how many people realize, when we talk about producers, so I think it was on the Brigade album, Mutt Lange actually wrote or co-wrote a few songs on that record, including All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You, which was a big song. I find it interesting. Did you ever, was there ever talk of Mutt producing Heart? Because it's interesting to see him have songs, but not actually involved in the production.
I don't think there was. I think that Mutt's involvement was that he submitted songs. And of course, whenever Mutt submitted a song, it came with a little caveat that said, and this song should be your first single, you know. So you know, our relationship with Mutt was pretty arm's length and professional.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, I see your dog. What's the dog's name, by the way, Ann? Because he's getting rambunctious. What's his name? Give him a shout out.
This is Homer.
What's his name?
And his name's Homer, and he's 12 weeks old, and he likes to bite toes. So yeah, I'm trying my best. Sorry, I didn't mean to have him in
It's okay. It's great. I mean, this is the world we're in now. Everybody is on Zoom and everybody's dealing with what they're dealing with. So it's the new norm. Right. But Homer's adorable, and I'll let you get back to tending to him. And give him some attention. He wanted to look like he wanted a little Zoom time there. So
yeah. Bye.
प्यार में तोहरे हमहु मारब जहर खाई के भूल ना जइहा जान पियावा घरे जाई के भूल ना जइहा जान पियावा घरे जाई के। कैसे भूल पैबू जान बच